Hi, welcome to Behind the Shot. I'm Steve Brazill, and today is going to be a little bit of a different kind of a show. Normally, about right now, I would do a quick bit on what the show is about. I would play you my intro and my music, and then it would come back on and I would get into the show itself. But today's not a normal show. A couple of weeks ago, a few friends of mine, Kersten Luts of the Camera Shake podcast and Dave Clayton of the He Shoots, He Draws podcast, asked if I wanted to join them for a collaborative type show. And I couldn't say yes fast enough. And today is going to be that show. I'm going to let Kersten explain all the details, but let's jump into Behind the Shot.
Howdy, folks. Today marks a milestone for the world of podcasting in general as we dive into uncharted territory. I'm beyond excited to team up with not one, but two renowned hosts from the photography world, Steve Brazill of Behind the Shot and Dave Clayton from He Shoots, He Draws podcast. Together, we're pulling back the curtain to reveal the magic behind your favorite podcast. At least, I'm thinking these are your favorite podcasts, because why would you be watching otherwise? It would make any sense if you think about it. Think about it. Well, if you've ever wondered, one of them must be. I mean, yeah. But if you've ever wondered what it takes to bring those pearls of wisdom to your ears every week, well, wonder no more. Join us as we peel back the layers and share the behind-the-scenes secrets. Make sure you stick around because we've got an insider's view coming your way. Right meow. Gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure being here with you two guys. I mean, I have to say, this to me, it's quite incredible because I freely admit that before I've ever started the Camera Shake podcast, I was actually listening to both of your podcasts as a mere punter, basically, back in those days before the pandemic, And to be honest with you, for me to be here on this show doing a collaboration show with both of you guys is awesome. That's all I can say.
The joy is ours, my friend. I'm honored that you actually listened to the show before you did yours. But this is, to me, when you texted me and said, "Hey, do you want to do this show with Dave and I?" First of all, I hadn't talked to Dave in a long time, and I love what he's doing. I love what he originally did with Glenn, and I was on the show actually when he was doing it with Glenn, although Glenn wasn't there at that point. And then when he restarted doing it with my buddy Alan Hess, who's 90 minutes from me, again, just a joy to be on with both of you guys as well.
When back to when I was doing it, and both myself and Glenn obviously knew you, Steve, and your rich tones, your voice is like just perfect for radio and podcasting. In fact, it was yourself and Ant Pruitt were the two guys I used to listen to and kind of knew in the industry. And podcasting really wasn't a plan for us. It was just something we sort of fell into. And then obviously I met Kersten, and what both of you have done with each of your shows, the production value and the fact that you do it on video, which I've never done as He Shoots, He Draws. So this is a first for me to do like a proper video episode as well.
See, this is going to radio. That to me is, that's what Scott Bourne used to say to me all the time was, I don't like doing video shows, but I'll do it for you, but I have a face for radio. It's the reason I'm in radio is because I have a face for radio. But we probably should explain that if you have ever wanted to know about podcasting, the ups, the downs, the successes, the failures, that's the idea of this, is it's three people who have been doing podcasting for a while, and we're just going to spend the next however long talking about making our podcast and what we think of it after having done it for so long. But that is an interesting one to me, because for me, I originally, when I was on the TWIP network, Frederick Van Johnson's network, This Week in Photo, originally for the first year and a half, I came to him and said, it has to be video, because I'm taking one photograph on my podcast, Behind the Shot. I take one photograph and we dissect with the photographer how it was made, right? So we talk about the choices that they made and why they made those choices in making the shot. And to me, that had to be video. But I also release an audio-only version of it. Kersten, you do both audio-only and video, right? But only audio in a podcast app, right?
Yes, correct. That's just simply because my podcast host doesn't feature video. So I use YouTube as a release platform for video. But just like you, actually, when my friend Nick and I, when we first started the podcast at the very beginning of the pandemic, it was an absolute no-brainer. I think we never thought not to do video, just simply because, I'm a photographer. Nick is a filmmaker, videographer, and we're talking about a visual medium. So it made absolute perfect sense to create a version of that show that was visual, especially because, we were talking, we would have guests on the show and we would talk about their photography. So you want to have a way to showcase that photography, and, video makes perfect sense rather than having to rely on verbally describing what that picture looks like. It makes, or maybe even like posting it on social media or something. It makes perfect sense to have that ability. And also, I always felt that there's sort of a connection that you create with the other person, like with the guests, if you can actually see each other. So, and I honestly, I don't think we ever thought not to do video. It was just a natural thing right from the first day. That doesn't mean to say that we knew how to do it. We absolutely did not know how to do any of it or how any of it worked. Like, we had zero idea. And, like, we had this idea of starting a podcast about 6 months before the pandemic started. And like many great ideas, life gets in the way and you get too busy and you kick the can down the road, and it stays a good idea and it never actually develops into anything. But then, of course, the pandemic happened, and I've told the story many times on the Camera Shake podcast, but basically, I spent a few weeks watching tons of Netflix, like everybody, and then I did the Marvel movie marathon a couple of times, once with my wife, once with my daughter. And by the time I was done with that, I needed to do something creative because it was driving me absolutely round the bend. And so, since Nick and I were FaceTiming every day, and we had really strict lockdowns over here in the UK, we were literally stuck in our houses, or like really confined to our houses, because I think we were allowed out 45 minutes a day or something for exercise at one point, and it was really that extreme. And so, we were talking every day, and we were like talking about photography, nerdy stuff. And so I said, like, hey, do you remember that idea, that we had like 6 months ago about doing a podcast? Maybe now that could be a fun thing to do, because I just need to do something creative. And so I remember this was a Friday afternoon. We were talking about it, and it's this thing, where you think like, oh, this is a really great idea. And then as you talk about it, you come up with lots of obstacles, and you come up with lots of things that you just simply don't know. Like, how, where do podcasts live? How does this whole thing work? How long should it be? Like, what should we talk about? How, and before you know it, you end up talking yourself out of a really good idea. And so, a couple of hours into that conversation, I remember saying to Nick, like, look, man, it's Friday now. What are you doing on Monday at 4 p.m.? And he said, well, this is nothing, because we're stuck in the house. So I'm not doing anything Monday, 4 p.m. It's as good a time as any. And I said, okay, cool, because Monday, 4 p.m. is when we're going to hit record. And we're going to record the first episode. And we're just going to have to figure it out between now and then. And it won't be perfect. And it'll probably going to be, it's going to be pretty terrible. So we called it Done is Better Than Perfect, because we just had to get it done. We knew it wasn't going to be perfect. But we also figured that, if we just kept doing it, we would learn how to do it and we would get better at it. And so, we sort of realized that episode 10 was going to be better than episode 1. And if we made it to episode 20, then that would be better than episode 10. And if we stuck it out and we lasted till episode 50, then we would have probably learned a thing or two by the time we hit episode 50, and so on. And so, it started as a thing that gave us structure at a time when there seemed to be zero structure there, because, everything was shut. You were confined to your house. You'd wake up in the morning and you didn't know what day it was, because every day was the same. And then it got to the point where you wake up and you didn't know what day it was and you didn't care anymore. And so, I just felt that I had to get some structure. And so, by recording an episode on a Monday and then editing it and stuff and then releasing it on a Thursday, we would give our week some structure. And then, once once it's released, once it's out on the Thursday, then you have to promote it for a day or two. Then you've got to start thinking about the next episode and what you're going to talk about and so on. And so you really, it just basically meant that throughout the whole week, there'd be some structure. There'd be something to do every day. And that was the intention initially, was just simply for us to get through the pandemic and to do stuff, and that's really how it started. And, and actually, I'm hopefully listeners will agree to that. But I think that my prediction sort of held true. By the time we hit episode 100, it was getting better. We sort of we started to know what was happening and how it worked.
See, and to me, I agree. Like my early episodes, because I do video, I had like this little teeny webcam and horrible lighting, and I'm afraid to share those old shows because I don't want anybody to see the video. But from early on, I was both audio and video, and actually, I have both video and audio in podcast feeds, and the video is also on YouTube. But Dave, I don't understand why when you started He Shoots, He Draws video, I mean, YouTube was big. What made you must have made that conscious choice that you don't want to, aside from the radio face. Why not? Or why not now?
Well, in the beginning, I mean, the show started really from, obviously, for anyone who doesn't know myself or Glyn, we actually met through Scott Kelby back in 2010 and became fast friends, and we would chat every day, and we collaborated on so much together. And it was 2018 that we were kind of talking to each other nearly every day, and we were ranting. We were talking about things in the industry. And I'd started listening to podcasts. I was, grew up listening to the radio. I like that format of the mystery of radio. I don't like radio shows necessarily with the video feed, because I like to hear them. And I just said to Glyn, do you know what? Some of these things we talk about, I think we could do a podcast. And it doesn't really matter who listens to us, because it's just an excuse for us to talk every week and just talk about things we like, dislike. And if you ever go back and listen to like the first 10, I think episode 4 was our first guest, and it was Alan Hess, bizarrely enough. And Glyn and I were just talking about things in the industry, kind of having a bit of a laugh about things like award winning. A lot of photographers always had award winning in their profiles, but never said what awards they won. And we kind of did some joke ads. We actually like paid for voiceover people to make some ads, and we were just having a bit of a giggle. But the intention was to get it done and get it out, and audio was the quickest way of doing it. 2 guys on a mic recording the audio. Glyn used to edit it. We got the intro. We got the lovely David McClelland, who's a good friend of ours, who's on British TV. He did the intro for us. He's the voice of you're listening to He Shoots, He Draws podcast. And it kind of just, the momentum was there. Now, weirdly, every single episode of the 183 that we've currently got all had video, because we did every single one on Zoom so that we could see the guest, because we had a thing of when we were talking, we'd say to the guest, we'd do the clap. I mean, the first few episodes weren't guests. It was only later on we decided, wow, we know so many people in the industry. Let's talk to them about stuff. So we'd hold our hand up like in class, so that we weren't talking over each other, because that can be quite frustrating. So bizarrely, I don't think I've got all of them, but I had quite a few of them saved, and then it was racking up space on my computer. But every single episode was on video. But weirdly, whenever we used to say to the guests that we had on, don't worry, it's not going to be video, but we're going to be on video to see each other, they were quite relieved, because it was less effort for them. They could just sit in their living room, sit in the bathroom, sit wherever, and we could just talk, and we wouldn't have the extra hassle of having to look good on camera. I mean, Glyn is great on camera. He's so professional, and I feel that I know I'll undersell myself, but I just felt like I liked the idea of podcast is audio for me. It was like that was the medium, so it was easy to do. Weirdly, we got some great numbers. I mean, bittersweet that the podcast started the week after my dad passed away. So I'll always remember when we did our first episode, and we got sponsorship straight away. We were getting paid by Westcott. I think I can't remember who the other one was, but we were earning money off it.
You realize how unusual that is, right?
From episode one, yeah. I mean, it was like our relationships had kind of borne that fruit. So it paid for the equipment, paid for the hosting, paid for the website and everything. And we were getting like 1,500 people a week listening to the podcast. And I mean, now we're on just short of 318,000 downloads in total. It used to be more, but there was a new regulation where it stopped like bots downloading, and the figures became truer. So we lost about 25% of our numbers. But I said, it doesn't matter, because people are listening, but people are listening all over the world. And we couldn't believe when we were talking to other people that had podcasts and thinking, they're getting 5,000-10,000 listeners a week, and we were getting like 3 times what they were getting. And then within, I don't know, 2 years, we've got like 90 odd 5-star reviews on iTunes. It really picked up momentum. But at no point did we ever kind of think, maybe we should do video now. Let's make this a video podcast. It just stuck with the audio. And for me, it's been like your production quality, both of you. I will watch it because of the way you interview your guests. You introduce the visuals. We kind of deliberately didn't do that. So if we spoke about, say, we had Joe McNally on. I think Joe's been on 3 times now, and we spoke about his Burj Khalifa image of his feet, and we referenced it, and we kind of said, go and follow Joe McNally on Instagram and you'll see the image. So we never had to show any of it. And when we spoke to our guests, we'd talk about their life. And if we did talk about an image, it was just really kind of go and have a look, go and check them out. And Glyn would have been able to do it. Glyn, and look at what he's doing now on a Sunday night. He's basically doing a live podcast with guests, and right. That format's really working well for him. But yeah, I'm just, I think for me, it was just quick. It was quicker to do audio and get the episodes out. And I kind of still like that. I know I should probably start to do video. And this episode, I said to you off air, this is kind of like the first episode of He Shoots, He Draws, kind of coming back from a hiatus. And I need to step up my game. I need to do more video. So I think some episodes, depending on the guest, I will ask if they're happy to do a video episode, and it'd have to go on YouTube for now. But like I said off camera, like you 2 guys on camera look so much better than I do on camera, because I've not got the space, the lighting and everything. So that was kind of part of a reason of not being on video. But be brave, try new things. So I like learning from other podcasts.
And it's, it really is like it's sort of it's a long road you travel down. Because I remember in the beginning when Nick and I first started this, we had no idea how to do any of this. I mean, as photographers and as videographers, we know how to light things. But in the beginning, it was like, I remember we started, because it was, like I said earlier, it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was like the full-on lockdown. So there was no way we could be in a room together. So we had to figure out how to do this remotely. How do we film ourselves in our respective homes and then get the files together? In the very beginning, it was literally like, we would be talking to each other on Zoom, and I would film myself with a separate camera. I would then take the SD card, drive over to Eton, which is about a 20-minute drive from here. I'd literally place the SD card on the roof of his car and then text him to say, the SD card is there. I'd jump back into my car, drive back home. He'd come out of his house, pick up this. It's like what do they call it? A dead drop. It's like a spy movie. That's ridiculous, really. But we just didn't know how to do any other way. And so I tried, I remember I tried one background and I didn't like it. And the next episode, I'll try something else. And I didn't like it. I tried a different corner of my living room or something. And I didn't like it. And so, and then when the pandemic eased up a little bit, we managed to be in the same room together, and then, we tried different sort of sets almost. How do we do it? And it got more and more complicated. So we'd add, instead of having one camera, we eventually had 3 cameras. So we shot 3 different angles. Then we had, I think, 7 lights at some point. And so, it would get more and more complicated. And so, I would head over to Nick's place. It would take us an hour and a half to set up for an episode. We'd have like gelled background lights and blah, 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 and all the rest of it. And then, we'd shoot the episode, and then we'd have to like rearrange, we had to break everything down, then rearrange his living room back to where it was, and it just became a massive effort to do that every week. And so, because we always, we kept thinking like, okay, if we add another camera, we can do this, and then that'll be better because we could do that. And if we add lights here and like accent lights, it'll be better. And there was a point where we sort of went like, wait, stop. How can we simplify the process and still make it look good? How can we improve it and still make it look good? Because, having 3 cameras means that the effort that has to go into the editing is like, exponentially more of a workload than it is if you just added 1 camera. And so, we had to like try out different things and try this for a little while, and we do like 10 episodes one way, and then we figured like, okay, well, actually, that doesn't make any sense if we do it this way, so we'll try something else. And it's sort of, it took a little while until that crystallization process then ended up with a version that we were happy with, that would basically mean it wouldn't take us absolutely forever to set up. We could set up really quickly. We would just use 1 camera. It would still look good. And everything worked. And then, of course, when Nick sort of exited the show, I was then in a situation where I'd have to do everything myself, like all the video editing, which was Nick's result previously. I would then have to do all of that myself. And I then had to literally look at the whole workflow and the whole process, and then just really drastically, reduce it down so that it's manageable. Because what most people might not necessarily realize is that although, this is true for all of us, we make these episodes, maybe in my case every week, in Steve's case fortnightly, but we still have like other lives and jobs and all the rest of it. It all has to like fit in with everything else. So the more time you spend creating each episode, in a sense, the less likely it becomes that you're going to carry on doing it, And so the idea was really, from my point of view, was how can I streamline this process so that it makes sense? I can actually achieve it, and I can create an episode every week, and I can still remain married.
It's funny because listening to both of you guys makes me feel a lot better, because when the way I originally started this podcast, I was talking to Frederick Van Johnson, who I kind of knew, and he came out to LA, and we were going to the Magic Castle or something like that. In fact, I'll never forget that one, because we're going to the Magic Castle. I picked him up at his hotel, and we're on our way. If you don't know what the Magic Castle is, look it up. But I'm taking him to the Magic Castle. Our reservation's like it's 6. It's 5 to 6, and we're 15 minutes away, stuck in traffic. He, in his suit and tie, gets out of the car and starts jogging down the street to go reserve, to make sure that we're there in time. It was hilarious. But that day, I had mentioned to him, I have this idea for a podcast, right? It's me and a guest talking about one of their shots. Basically, it's the 2 of us interviewing their photo and having the photo answer our questions by basically dissecting this photo. And he looked at me and he said, "Why don't you do it on my network," which is the This Week in Photo Network? And I went, okay, cool, let's do that. And starting out, it was video, but I didn't really know anything about lighting a video. I set myself up in a room. I mentioned earlier that I hated the lighting. I'm afraid to mention those shows to anybody because I'm afraid they're going to look at him and go, "Oh my God, this guy's absolutely, crap at video." But as I started recording those, he had an editor. I didn't have to edit anything. All I had to do was get the guest, record the show, send the files over to, and I recorded them in Zoom, over to the editor, and they put all the lower thirds in and did everything. Well, after about 1.5 years, I left the network. And I looked at a couple friends. I said, kind of like Dave with a hiatus, I think I'm done. And a good friend of mine, Troy Miller, wedding photographer here in Southern California, he'd be a good guest for you, by the way, Kersten. Troy insisted that I keep going. So I took about 3 months to revamp the show and do exactly what you mentioned, Kersten. I didn't understand, and I'm a tech guy, like I'm an old school network engineer, but I didn't understand web hosting, that I had to get a host. Now I had to edit the audio and the video myself, which I've got 40 years in radio. Editing the audio is not a problem, but Final Cut Pro, while I could use it, I was by no means any good at it. I had to learn all of that. I relaunched the show, and I did it without skipping an episode until last July. And at the end of last July, I took a hiatus until just about a month or so ago, almost about a 6-month hiatus. But my hiatus was different. I took a hiatus out of, I don't want to use the word frustration, although there was some frustration. But it's kind of like what both of you were saying. Like I say, it makes me feel so much better. It's not a little bit of work. I don't have sponsors. I have a fair amount of downloads, and I've had people offer, but I don't have sponsors. I do all the editing myself. I do all the booking myself. My show is video, takes a little bit longer. And people don't realize that if I release a show that's an hour and 15 minutes, I very easily have 8 to 10 hours into that show by the time I'm done. Between the emails, the prep, the creating the lower thirds, right? Like you're seeing lower thirds in this video. I have to create those for each guest. The editing, the uploading, the writing the email to the guest, the doing the social media posts, it really adds up. And last summer, I'm curious if this ever happened to you guys. So because of my show and the way I do my blog posts, for each guest, I write a little blurb about the guest. I put any links that we talk about and all the links that they want mentioned. You know, sometimes I had somebody the other day actually say to me, you realize some of your guests are using you to promote their workshops and promote their books. And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Like, it's not an ad. I'm not there to do an ad for them, but I don't pay my guests to be on my show. Look, if you got a book you want to hawk your book, that's fine. We'll talk about it for a little bit. It's not going to be an entire show. I'll say to you, tell me about your book. You tell me about your book, and we move on. But I need photos for the blog post, a sample gallery. I need the photo we're going to talk about. And I don't want to ever mess with somebody's photo if I can avoid it. So I need your photo at 1080 high for video. I need a 16:9 crop for the YouTube poster that I put title text on. I do modify it in that way. And I had a guest, a referral from a mutual friend of all of ours, actually. Well-known person, was going to be on the show, said, hey, I've got just the perfect shot. Let's talk about this shot. They agreed to it. I'm like, cool. In my head, I've got them scheduled for this date coming up. And as soon as we picked the shot, I sent them the list of the assets that I needed. What links do you want shared? What's your social media stuff that you want on your lower third? And that person answered back, you know what? This is a little too much. I can't do the show. And I had it scheduled. And then I had another guest I started talking to in December. Beginning of January, they hit back and said, we're sorry, we'll get you what you need. Never heard back. February, heard back, sorry, we'll get you what you need. Didn't hear back until June. And that frustration hit in of, before the pandemic, it was a lot easier. I would say to somebody, do you want to be on a podcast? And they'd go, yeah. And after the pandemic, it was, yeah, you know what? We'll give you attention when we're ready. And it became frustrating. So I went on a hiatus. Have you guys ever had, I don't want to say, look, the guests can do what they want. I'm just honored that they're on the show. I don't mean it that way. But at the same time, when you're trying to run a show and guests say yes and then ghost you for a month and come back and go, hey, I'm still going to get you this stuff. It's like, I'm not going to chase you down. If people put time into what's important to them. And if this isn't important to you, that's okay. But I can't schedule a date. Has that happened to you guys? I mean, in the history of us doing it, because we were 2 years before the pandemic, so trying to get guests, generally, I mean, we pretty much exhausted the list of people we'd worked with, and a lot of them were happy to support us. So we did 110 episodes before the lockdown in April 2020.
And yet we've only done 73 episodes since then. The only guest that like comes to mind was, it was one of those where, you know, if you don't ask, you don't get. And we got Austin Kleon, we got Chase Jarvis, we got a couple that we didn't think we'd ever get. And then there was this one photographer who I won't name him, but he's a very well-known photographer and an older gentleman. And we'd seen him at a show, and I just turned to Glyn and went, man, I'd love to talk to this guy on the podcast, because he mentioned one thing, which was personal projects, which was a big thing of Glyn's. So I reached out. It's one of the things I love doing is just going out and send an introductory email, explain who we were. Got the guy's son, and the son came back, was very kind, and oh, thank you so much. My dad would enjoy that. He's trying to do more of these kind of things. Yeah, absolutely, we do it. It was only like a 5-hour difference, and we set it up. We kind of picked a date, and then when we kind of send the sheet of, okay, this is how we do it, we kind of get you to just, as long as you've got quick time, or you can record audio, a pair of headphones, that's all we need. And he came back and said, this isn't going to work. My dad's old school. Like, he basically just wants to talk to you on a telephone.
Oh.
And we just didn't have the technology to make that, because we couldn't see him. We knew we'd be talking over him. We knew like his career was so prestigious, and we wanted to hear the stories, and we just felt we won't do him justice doing it this way. So I spoke to his son, and he actually said, okay, no, thank you, because I was a bit worried about how this would work. If you two are ever in the town that they live in, let's do it in person. And we've not been able to do that, and I was gutted, because it was a great photographer. So that's really the only guest where it didn't work out. For the others, it's been purely, like I said, because we weren't doing video, it was kind of easier to get guests. But weirdly, during the pandemic, before you'd be like, hey, like, Joe McNally, could you do the podcast? Yeah, but I'm traveling to Southeast Asia for 6 weeks. So I'm not going to be back until. As soon as the pandemic hit, everyone was available because nobody was allowed out. So we ended up having some really good conversations with photographers who couldn't go and do what they do, about how they've adjusted. Like, what are you doing? There was a really good one with Katrine Eisman, who now works for Adobe, and she was teaching herself different kinds of photography in her house. She was shooting things using natural light, and she said she kind of used that to learn something different. So we had some good guests during that period, but bizarrely, that I said April 2020, when the pandemic hit, was when Glyn left the show. So he had, I'd say, of the 110 episodes, Glyn probably edited 75% of them, and I did all the extra work. I did all the graphics and everything. But then as Glyn was starting to get busier, getting into his projects, I started to take over more of it. So by the time Glyn left, I was then doing everything. He was in the process of trying to move house. It was, he had a lot going on, and we just kind of agreed, let's part and draw a line under it. I'm going to continue the podcast. You kind of get your thing done, and I'll just carry on. He shoots, he draws. And contacted Alan and said, I'll make it really easy for you, Alan. All you have to do is show up. You don't have to do anything else. I will edit, I will promote, I'll do the graphics, I will everything. You just show up at midday for you, 8 o'clock for me. I'll line up the guests, I'll email the guests and everything. And Alan was just being Alan. He went, sure. So he was kind of a guest co-host for, I don't know, maybe 6 months. And it just felt good. We worked really well together, and he just became the co-host of He Shoots, He Draws. And then when we came out of the pandemic, during the pandemic, obviously, Alan couldn't shoot. Alan was the house photographer at the Pechanga Stadium in San Diego. He lost all his work. So Alan was more available. As soon as we come out of the pandemic, it didn't really affect me as much. But for Alan, his work started picking up, which was great. So there were fewer episodes and bigger gaps between them. And like I said, subsequently, 110 episodes up to April 2020, 73 episodes in the 4 years since. It massively reduced. Yeah, we had no sponsors. Guests were still easy to come by. They were still willing to do it, partly because there was no video. The other thing as well with you two guys, I wanted to ask you was on the video side. I remember when Glyn and I were first doing it, and there was always a thing about a lot of podcasts fail if they don't reach 8 to 10 episodes. If they don't break that, they fail. They fall to the side. And I was seeing a lot of people kind of going, I know what, I'll do a podcast. I'm just going to start a podcast, and then they'll be going on saying, hey, who do you want me to talk to? And it felt a little bit kind of underprepared, like, oh, I'll just do a podcast for the sake of doing a podcast. Seemed very unprepared. And a lot of them fell by the wayside. They were putting a lot of effort into it. You know, big fanfare. I'm doing a podcast. I'm going to be here. 8, 9, 10 episodes, gone. Nothing more to see. And some of that, I wondered, was I don't think they appreciated the amount of effort that goes into putting in a podcast, like you said, Steve. There's a lot more than just talking.
Yeah.
And from a video side of thing for you two is Glyn and I had said, you know, we're getting 1,500 downloads, audio downloads, but we'd seen podcasts who were doing audio. Go on YouTube, 37 views, 23 views. Like not even breaking 50 views. Yeah. And it's like, wow, that's a lot of effort to put in, you know, like you were saying, 7 cameras, 3 mics, production team, dancers in the background, for 37 views. And I remember saying to Glyn, it's because, a monkey sniffing his bum will get 20 million views. Okay. But to sit in front of YouTube for an hour and a half and watch a podcast is quite an investment. Sit in a car. I used to consume podcasts when I was working at Astute Graphics. I spent 24 hours a month in my car. I was listening to about 8 or 9 different podcasts. Of those 8 or 9, I think there's only 2 left that are still existing. I was consuming so much. During the pandemic, numbers took a dive. I mean, more than 50% drop off. We were going from 1,500 to 350, 400, 500. No one was driving. No one was in their car listening. It was habit. So even the audio dropped off because of the people's habits. So, I will only watch a podcast online if the guest is someone I want to watch. And I'll be at home working from home. I'll have it on the side and I'll kind of listen and look up from time to time. But I think the thing was, do I want to put in this much effort on the video if I'm getting 37 views versus 1,000 for the audio? And that was kind of the put off for us. So I mean, how do you two guys feel about that?
Okay. So there's so much to unpack on that one. I love this part of the conversation because for years I didn't push YouTube because I have video also in the podcast feed. It's not the same feed. I have a feed for behind the shot audio only and a feed for behind the shot video wherever you get podcasts, right? If that service supports video. So Spotify doesn't support video. It's audio only there. Amazon Music doesn't support video, but Apple Podcast does. And what's interesting is I don't push the YouTube. I give out the link periodically nowadays, and I'm up to, like 21,500 subscribers. I mean, I've got subscribers, but that doesn't translate to views at all in any manner, shape, or form. I release a new episode, and so advertisers usually look at 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days for downloads in a podcast or views, whatever. I don't do that. For me, I look from the time I release a show to the time I release the next show, which is a 2-week window. That's my baseline, is how do my shows do between those 2-week timeframes? And I have shows that'll have, 400 or 500 views in 2 weeks on YouTube, which is, pathetic.
That's good.
Especially when you see,
that's good.
I'm going to have emails come to me on this one. Somebody emailed me. I was on Kersten's show the other day, and somebody emailed me and said, I'm listening to you bash other music photographers right now on Kersten's show. I'm like, great, I'm going to get more emails. But there's some photography-based YouTube channels that, I'm sorry, I can't watch. Amazing production quality. But I'm sorry, the host comes across as an ass. And some people may think I do too. But to me, I can't watch some people, and they'll release a video in 3 hours, have 20,000 views. And I don't get it, and I've got 400. But because I have both in my podcast feed, I get a split between the two, and it's surprising to me. About 55, it depends on the episode, right? Some episodes people really want to see it or whatever. But I usually get probably about 55% of my downloads are audio only. About 45% are video, which is way higher than I thought it would be. Like, I get a fair amount in my podcast downloads. And my podcast downloads, before I took my hiatus, I don't normally share these numbers, but I don't care. Before I took my hiatus last July, I was probably getting 8,000 to 10,000 downloads a month, something like that. Now, when I release an episode, I probably hit 6,500. Maybe I've only done like 3 episodes since I've been back. And I'm probably hitting 6,500, 7,000 downloads a month now. And then as the episode gets older in that 2-week window, that drops, and then it peaks again, and it drops, and it peaks again. And what's interesting is I have had episodes where I tangentially thought, I wonder if this episode's going to have an impact on that. Right? Like, you've mentioned Joe McNally. I've had a few guests on my show that had my heart racing. McNally was one of them, right? I had emailed McNally. His wife had answered back. He's too busy. I'm like, okay, cool. I get it. And then at one point we were on something, and I said something to him, and he goes, yeah, I'll do it. I'm like, cool. And he came on, and I was like shaking inside. It was the same way with the first time I had Scott Kelby on. And I think of Scott as a friend now, but at the time I was panicked. Trey Ratcliffe, I was panicked about. Pete Souza was a huge one for me. When I had Pete on, I was like freaking out. And what's interesting to me is those shows, those guests do not give me the bump in downloads or views that I would have thought they would. Yeah. Like, surprisingly, there is no change in numbers in my show when I have a Joe McNally on versus an unknown. What does it is if I do a gear review. Like, if I do Canon Autofocus Explained, I suddenly, on that video, I've got almost 500,000 views on YouTube and a ton of comments that, I spoke over Rudy too much and interrupted him too much, which goes to what Dave said earlier. When there's a delay in Zoom or on video conferencing, it can be difficult when you're having a real world conversation where people do interrupt each other. It's just tighter, right? On video, if you go, hold on a second, let me dive deeper into that. The person doesn't hear that for a second, so they keep talking. In the real world, if you go, whoa, Kersten, dive deeper in, Kersten stops because he understands that it's a conversation. But I've always been shocked that some YouTube videos that I do, I would think would take off, but I think it's what you said, Dave. People on YouTube want 10 minutes, 5 to 15 minutes. Long form viewing on YouTube, it's just not conducive to it. And my shows are an hour long. I like to think that's what it is.
And it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same in my case. Nobody's really, or very few people are going to sit down and they're going to watch a whole Camera Shake podcast episode that's like an hour and a half long, sometimes 2 hours long, right, on YouTube. I can see that in the watch time stats, like I can see how many minutes, like literally minutes, people watch per episode or something on average, and but what I do hear anecdotally in like comments and stuff, is that people might, they might watch a little bit on YouTube, then they might like, jump in the car and continue listening on audio on the way to work, and then they come back and they listen to it. And, when they get back home, they might listen to it a little bit more, or watch it a little bit more on YouTube. But, what YouTube does allow you to do, it's another channel, that allows you to do other things. Like, for instance, like in my case, when Nick and I first launched the podcast at the very, very beginning, we set up the YouTube channel, but I thought, well, I'm not going to call it Camera Shake Podcast. I'm going to call it just Camera Shake, because I wasn't really sure. I wanted to keep it open as to what I could do with that channel further down the road. Up to now, it's predominantly served as a container to hold the video versions of the podcast, but that's also changing. So over the next 6 months or something, you'll see additional content, literally additional content that'll go onto the YouTube channel that is not going to really exist in the audio world. And so, if I compare the performance of the podcast on YouTube versus audio, there's really no comparison. It's like you said earlier, like sometimes you have videos and they've, episodes of like, I don't know, 67 views or something, and some have several thousand, fine. But the majority are really in the hundreds rather than in the thousands. But then if you look at the performance on audio, it's a completely different kettle of fish. Top 5%, just saying.
Okay, so then let me ask that. I want to follow up on what Dave said then. Why do you do the video if you end up with episodes that have 67 views? Why do we do that?
It's very simple, because I record it like a video. I basically go video first. I'm not an audio engineer. Although I should know a lot of. I should know a lot about audio since I've had a career in the music industry, but I'm not an audio engineer. I record the episode as a video, and the audio track of that video becomes the audio version of that that podcast. So actually for me, it's like, it doesn't feel like it's extra effort. I edit the episode in Final Cut. Well, otherwise I might be editing it in I don't know, Logic or GarageBand or whatever. It doesn't make any difference to me, So actually for me, for all practical intents and purposes, it's easier to just view it as a video. So it doesn't really feel like it's any extra effort, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Another point as well.
Say again, Dave, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that the thing that we've not spoken about yet, which I wanted to ask you both, is the benefit you both have is social media. You have video content to promote your podcast on a video platform. I don't. Ours has always been a graphic. We've never had call outs. We've never had snippets. We've never had the ability to show like a little bit of somebody saying something. I'd like to hear more about this. Check out Camera Shake Podcast. So that from a video side of things, it's great having it to promote the show, because I think that does help, because, you can click on the link, go straight to the audio version. Then in the show notes, if you want to go and watch the video, you can go and watch the video. But I think that's what you both have that we've never had is...
See, but you do though, because you said you're recording Zoom. So couldn't you? So when I could,
I just didn't.
Okay. That makes sense. Cause when I started, I recorded on Zoom. That's all I did. And then I also started using Zencaster. Then I switched over. When I went on my own, I went to OBS, which I absolutely loved. I refused to do Ecamm at the time because Ecamm was like, I could do stuff in OBS. You could never do an Ecamm. That's changed now. I use Ecamm now. Kersten uses Ecamm. It's Ecamm that's doing these scene changes here. But, even on Zoom now, and now the next version, it's in beta now of Ecamm, supports connecting to Zoom, which will make things a lot easier. Because now everybody knows how to use Zoom after, a lifetime of a pandemic. You can send somebody a Zoom link and bring them into Ecamm to do your recordings, just like I'm doing with Ecamm natively here. But, it's interesting to me, the technical side of the video stuff and the audio stuff, because I've got 40 something years and 45 years in radio now. I'm totally comfortable with audio. I used to edit on reel to reels where we would cheat if we needed to, like a commercial was 62 seconds and it's like, it has to be 60. So we would wrap a piece of scotch tape around the capstan shaft on the reel-to-reel, which would make it fatter, which would cause it to speed up, and we'd end up with a faster tape. Audio was easy for me in digital or regular format. The video was a learning curve for me. And so doing an OBS or an Ecamm made doing it on my own so much easier because the edit it is easier. Still, an hour-long show takes me about 2 hours to edit because I mute coughs and, whatever. But here's the other thing, and I'm curious. I don't think I've ever noticed on yours, Dave. And I've commented on my own podcast about this before, or maybe I even said it on Kersten's last time. It drives me nuts when I listen to audio and people have overcut it.
Oh,
because
God, yes.
There are a lot of people out there, and there's software, right? If you use Ophonic can automatically, which is an online processing software for podcasters, it can automatically remove gaps between people. And so sometimes you hear podcasts where the talking is so tight. And look, I understand people want to get through it fast. I know people that are like that. I know people who listen to audio podcasts on 2x speed all the time. But for me, and I think it's my radio background, I want to hear people think. I want to hear oh man, that's
100%. I want to hear the pause. I want to hear the breath. And
yes,
it's like how I see it is I hate jump cut. When I see video content, I'm like, for goodness sake, you're making 1 minute of content and you can't even say a whole sentence without cutting and cutting and cutting. And I hate it. And I can't consume that content because I find it's overdone, overused and badly done. People think that they do it. They're like, oh yeah, but people have got a short attention span. I'm not a goldfish. I can listen to 1 minute of somebody coherent with a sentence. Now, when I hear a podcast where they've taken all the breaths away, it is so obvious. And like you said, Steve, I want to hear the pause. Because our minds are trained to how we listen and view, and we can tell when something's off. It's like bad visual effects, bad audio. We know when something's off and it's off-putting. It reduces the experience. So when I'm listening to a podcast, I'll listen to it on I'll decide to listen to it 1.5 or 2 if I want. But when you take the breaths out and it's just like cut, there's no pause. It takes me away from the experience, and then I probably listen to it for 5 minutes and I'm done. I can't.
The analogy I use is magic. And that is when you're doing magic, you don't want them to see what you're doing with this hand, and that hand may sit still, right? And you're doing a distraction with some other hand. And the problem is when people do those, I've watched at times a YouTube video. Every time they cut it, what they'll do is they'll go from wide, they'll jump in tight, they'll jump back out, and they try to hide their cut with that. You do that to me 6 times in a minute, I now have motion sickness.
Yeah. And you're showing me that you can't talk. Like, you're creating something that requires speech and you can't speak. You can't think about the content. You can't, there's been times, like when we record, how many times have you two lost your train of thought but carried on? And you've just gone, I've completely forgotten what I was going to talk about there. And I love that. I love that when you have that natural and something you said, Steve, I wanted to say before I forget is also it's like we don't always resonate with everybody. There are people in the industry. Honestly, I've met a couple of them. They are very sweet in person, but on camera, I just cannot watch. It's not for me. And then there's people who are just, got a small podcast, not a great bunch of listeners, but I love their personality. I love the way they talk about what they love. Funnily enough, at the photography show, which myself and Kersten ran, Kersten actually did a session. I got Kersten in to be a speaker for the first time this year, and he did editing his podcast on Final Cut on an iPad. But there was this guy, his name was was it Alan Bell? I think it was Alan Bell. And he was doing a session for Hannibal. he had 3 people come and sat and watch him talk. 3 people. He spoke for his 30 minutes like he had 1,000 people. He was not fazed by nobody being there. It was like a horror. It was a really early morning. I think it was the Monday or the Tuesday. 3 people turned up and he presented like he had 1,000 people. And I went up to him and I said, I have so much respect for you because your professionalism. You put everything into your presentation. It didn't fluster you. He had a nice Scottish accent. I'm like, honestly, I could watch him. I could watch him talk. I could consume content from him because I loved his authenticity.
Right.
But when I see people trying too hard, over editing, making it about them and not the guest, or making it about them and not the subject, or it keeps coming back to them, I find it hard. And also bad audio. So many newer podcasts, it's just bad audio. It's like you are only doing the audio version and it sounds like you're recording it with a shoe. And this is an audio experience and you're making that painful for me, and you want me to like look at it 45 minutes, an hour, you want me to listen to this bad audio. And I mean, you know, Steve, it's and both of you, it's you can have bad video if the audio's great, but you can't have great video if the audio's bad. So you will watch a bad video if the audio is very good. But I just think when you are making a podcast and you can't even get the first thing right, like a half decent microphone, or listen back to your podcast, does it sound good to you? Or is it muffly, crackly, like, you know, Kirsten's audio going at the start when he was having that like kind of Cylon broken. I've listened, there's been podcasts where they've just gone ahead and put that out with that problem. Yeah. And I'm like,
I have guests sometimes connect to me on their laptop mic, and I warn everybody, you need headphones, and they'll show up with no headphones. Or I had one guest have AirPods that weren't charged and they died 20 minutes in. So now he's got speakers and an echo and the audio sounds horrible, and they're on a, laptop mic and speakers, and the sirens are coming through. And I will take an immense amount of time to try and clean it up because I have no choice. But that's audio only. But audio is 80% to me of any video. Like if you're watching a video, audio is 80% of it. It's interesting that you said that thing though about if, it comes back to you or something, because that's interesting. I get a lot of crap about that. But I don't look at my show, and maybe it's a fault in me. It probably is. I don't look at my show as an interview show. I think that's part of the difference. I've done interviews for radio. You ask a question, guest answers, rinse and repeat, right?
Yeah.
I look at my show as a conversation, right? Yes. I have questions about the shot. You know how the shot was made. And again, I've described it before as it's the two of us interviewing the photograph.
Yeah.
So it's more, to me, it's more conversational, but a lot of people do watch my show expecting what age were you when you had your first beer? Yeah. Wait for the
chronological
answer. Right. And to me, that can, in a podcast form where I have an hour, that can get really super redundant after a while.
Yeah.
That's why we stopped. Yeah.
But it's also, it's difficult, of course, because when you first start podcasting, let's say, for instance, in my case, I had no radio experience or anything. In my previous life as a musician, I've been interviewed several times, but I hadn't ever interviewed anybody else. So I had really virtually almost zero experience with the whole thing. And so it's a learning experience. Like it just takes time to get better at it, And that's, for me, that was an important aspect of it. I figured that, the first 10 people I interview is probably not going to be that thrilling. But, by the time I've made 100 episodes, I'll probably would have picked up a thing or two, and I probably would have gotten better at doing that just by doing it. And the other thing I just want to say in terms of like being able to do things like, intricate edits, spending a lot of time on things. I think what people often forget when they listen to shows like ours is that there isn't a massive production team behind the show. It isn't like, Diaries of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett, where there's like 16 people sitting in back offices. He employs somebody whose sole job it is to think of a title for the next episode. The title guy. I mean, these shows, like our shows, aren't like that. These are one person productions where, as the producer, basically, you have to be everything. You have to be the producer, the presenter, the talent, the writer, the person who does the pre-production, the person who gets on the email or the phone to get the guests in, the person who does the editor. You have to be the editor. Then you have to put it out. You have to be the promoter and the marketer and the face of it and everything. And you literally have to be the whole thing, and everything just comes down to one person. So, and that basically means it takes up a lot of time. And there isn't like the monetary or financial reward that you could say like, yeah, I'll drop everything else and this be my full-time job from now on. So I could actually do all this, so all of us, we're doing this literally on top of all the other things that go on in life. Whether that's
life.
Yeah, families, life, yeah.
It's funny, so you mentioned... Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and as a consequence, there is a certain balance that you have to strike, between production quality, frequency, and whether you do it at all, because it's quite easy to kind of go, well, this is just way too much work. I just can't do it all, and so for me, it's always been a question of looking at the process. And this was incidentally, when I, the thing I talked about at the photography show was all about that. It's like, how do you break down the process? And how do you, in my case, I took every single step in the process and I applied the 80-20 rule brutally to every single thing. And I literally just fixed it. For those listeners or viewers who don't know, the 80-20 rule, basically, it's essentially a rule where you figure out, like, how can I get 80% of the result with 20% of the input? Like 20% of the effort, and if I can still get 80% of the outcome, then we call that good and we'll move on to the next thing, right? So we don't always have to get to the full 100%. So a good example would be the audio processing, for example. So when Nick was part of the show, he was actually a trained audio engineer. That's what he did. He had a recording studio. So for him, so naturally he would process the audio and it sounded great. Fantastic. But when I ended up doing it on my own, I literally had to ask myself, like, okay, what can I do? How can I get 80% of the result with 20% of the input? 80% of the result, because I realized that I'm not a trained audio engineer. I would, if you give Nick anything to edit, it will always sound better than anything that I could ever produce. And that's just a given, right? But how could I get like 80% there? And which tools can I use that will allow me to get that result? And of course, we're so lucky that we live in a time where there are AI or electronic, tools out there that we can use that allow us together. But I basically applied that to every single part of the process. And that's the only way that I can realistically put out an episode every week without fail, is because I'm not trying to be the best sounding podcast in the world. I'm not trying to be the smoothest video edited podcast or video there's on YouTube. I'm trying to get like 80% there,
Yeah.
And that's the difference between making, an episode a week or making one episode a month, for example, So for me, and then of course the question then of course very quickly becomes like, well, why do you make an episode a week? You could make an episode a fortnight or an episode a month or whatever. And the answer is very simple. I just love doing it. Like every time, to me, this is like still, I'm whatever, just over 200 episodes in. But to me, every time I have a guest on the other end of the line and they're giving me their time, like they're giving me a couple of hours of their life and I can ask them anything I want to ask them. To me, that is still mind-blowing. That's like my own university, I always call it, because I have learned so much since I started this podcast, I've gotten to know so many people. I've made so many friendships, like yourselves, actually.
Right.
And so I've gotten to know so many other people. But, I've had the opportunity to speak to people that are really at the top of the game in their genre of photography or business or whatever it may be. And so to me, it's like, it's still mind-blowing that for some reason I'm able to have that time and talk to them. And of course, my hope is that if I learn a thing or two, then hopefully the listener or the viewer will also have the same experience and learn a thing or two in each episode. And that's the driving factor. So I want to make an episode every week because I just can't wait to talk to the next person and see what I can learn from them.
That is exactly why I started my show, because I was new in photography, not new, but I had questions. I just would see a photo and it's like, I want to ask the photographer how the damn thing was made. That's the whole reason I started my show. But you're right. We have to wear so many hats. Like I was watching American Idol the other day, and 3 or 4 crew members, union, brought out a mic stand for the next singer. One mic stand, Mike was already in the mic stand. 3 or 4 people doing this, watching the guy set the mic stand down, and then looked over and did a thumbs up. We have to do it all. And my problem is a little bit of OCD. So the automated tools like Adobe Podcasts or Ophonic or something, I've tried them. Sometimes it works. Sometimes I can hear the compression or it over processes it and I don't like it. So I've got it down. If anybody's doing a podcast out there and is looking in this conversation for the technical side, I use Isotope RX. I've got it down where I will rarely do an EQ on people, except if I have to correct that they had a laptop mic or something like that, but I do. I always do compression. And then I bring that audio file and sync it up with the video in Final Cut. So now I'm literally an audio repair person, noise reduction, bring it in, do all of that. I export the audio only, round trip it back to Isotope, where I use a loudness control to set it to what's called -16 LUFS for Apple Podcasts. It's not just normalizing to -1 dB or something like that. There's a loudness standard for podcasts that I level to. Bring that audio back into Final Cut, export that video out. You have to learn to do all of this stuff that in some ways is really fun. I just don't want to spend my whole life doing it. And the problem is when you're a control freak, I don't trust some of the automated tools to do that. So I've learned it. And I don't think it's a bad thing that I've learned it. But even for me, I've come up with that workflow that I'm not sure is 80-20. It's probably 95-5. But it's the same thing, right? I'm trying to get it done as fast as possible, which I'm like Kersten, I approach it video first. But the hardest thing for me was when I was starting, I didn't even know where to go for some things. Like for me, just finding hosting was stressful. Like that was, and again, I'm a tech guy, right? But for me, it's like I'm looking at all these hosting companies going, do I go with Libsyn? Do I go with Simplecast? Do I go with Anchor? Do I go with the one I chose, which is Blueberry? Deciding on those price schemes versus formatting versus Blueberry lets me publish the episode and upload it from within my WordPress blog. The feed URL is my domain name. It's not libsyn.com/ behindtheshot.libsyn.com or something like that. These are all the decisions that have to be made. And if you're into tech at all, it's really fun to figure out. But make no mistake, you've got to have a passion for wanting to do that episode every week, or in my case, every 2 weeks. One of my favorite things is, this was a Joe McNally thing that made me happy too, is when you ask somebody a question and instantly they go, oh, wow, good question. Because I know gold is coming afterwards. Like you can tell when you ask a question somebody didn't expect, but they're not offended by or not bothered by, right? I've had questions I've asked where people say, I asked technical, okay, what was your exposure? And I've had people say to me, I don't need to tell you that. If you ask that, you're a beginner. To which my response is, you don't have a copyright on your exposure. My God, man. If they can't make the same shot as you with your exposure, but they can learn, right? It's a freaking baseline. Throw me a bone. But yeah, it's when I ask a question like that, to me, and they say good question, I know something gold is coming.
Yeah. When we've had guests, we've always said, is there anything you don't want to talk about? I don't want to take you in a place where there's an awkwardness or there's something, recently that's happened. You might have something ongoing that you don't want to, we don't want to talk, bad about other people. So we've always tried to avoid that. You talking about I've been making notes so I don't forget these things. It was interesting what you said about
the same thing. Yeah. I've got a Word document up going, don't forget to ask about this.
Yeah. So when you said about the interview versus a conversation, when Glyn and I started, it was really a series of conversations and people like just having a chat about things. But we found very quickly we were getting into the interview, and it was becoming this week's interview, an interview with, and we had chronological questions and we would go through and there'd be key things we wanted to ask about. And that's kind of where it started to get very formulaic and like thinking of a guest. And that's where my joy started to kind of go. And then that's why there were less episodes, there were bigger gaps. And then over time, this is like an intervention thing. I got lazy and I was putting in next to no effort into the podcast. I do the graphics. I've got a Illustrator file set up to make the squares. I'd get the image. I'd try and think of a title, try not to be clickbait. But in the end, I'm just doing a Zoom call and I'm just using the audio straight out of Zoom. I might run it through enhanced speech in Premiere Pro because I always edit in Premiere Pro. I take the feed in. So where it used to be, Steve, you record your audio, I'll record my audio, I'd match it. I always edited in Premiere Pro. I never used Audition. I'd line everything up, and then obviously the enhanced speech came along and we'd fix it with some filters and things. The last episode I put out was Sharon, who was somebody I saw on TikTok, and she ran a small business, and I just wanted to talk to her, kind of give her a little bit of a boost, a platform to chat about her business. And it literally was Zoom, finish, we chat, finished. I did the yes, that's right, Sharon Harrison. She was lovely, and it was a really good chat, and it was probably the quickest, fastest, laziest edit I'd done, because it was purely the Zoom audio with a little bit of enhancement, topped and tailed it, put it out. Haven't done an episode since, September. And it was after that I felt like I really enjoyed that chat, but I realised I just put no effort into this, and I needed to take a break from it. I needed to step away. It's a bit like with presenting. I like going to watch presenters, not because what they're teaching me, it's how they present. So when I consume podcasts, I like listening to how they start the show, how they structure the show, how they have breaks, where they bring in ads. Are there too many ads at the start? What music they're using, how they're just piecing it all together. And I needed that time away to appreciate the art of podcasting again, for me to want to go back into it and not just do it for the sake of doing it. Because one of the nicest things that happened a long, long time ago when Glyn and I were doing what we did was we'd see people. I would meet people in the industry, and they'd go, "Oh, hi Dave, how you doing? Where's Glyn? What's Glyn up to? What's he doing?" And I said to him, I felt like Gromit to his Wallace. I felt like Robin to his Batman. I was the sidekick, and it would always be, "Hi Dave, but where's Glyn?" And because Glenn's always been steps ahead of me in terms of content production, what he does, because I've got a day job. He's always done his thing. The really lovely moment was the photography show after we started doing the podcast, and we've done, I don't know, maybe 25, 30 episodes. And somebody came up and was like, Dave, oh man, love the podcast. And every conversation after then was never, where's Glenn? I wasn't his mate that was just tagging along. Even now, people are like, at a photography show, you still doing the podcast? Oh, I love the podcast. It's one of my favourite ones. It's like, you haven't done an episode in a while. And I love listening to you and Alan. And it was nice that people were enjoying listening, and it didn't matter. I was just looking at the stats, funny enough, because we're on Simplecast. And when I was putting out episodes over the past year, or at least from September backwards, that first kind of week or so would be around 300, 350 downloads, which I was still pleased about, because that means there's 350 people somewhere listening to us talking about whatever. But I just went in and checked the stats, and since September to now, the last 10, 12 episodes are all around 900, 960, 1,000, 1,200. We are still getting people listening to old episodes. And when I go in the stats, there was one weekend where I had 300 downloads over a weekend. I haven't put an episode out since September. So right. People are consuming it. And I feel like I've let the podcast down by not concentrating on it. But like we said, Steve, it's a lot of work. And I'm only doing audio. I'm not even doing video. And when I said about, I don't like bad audio, I don't like when you can tell a show's on autopilot, I didn't want to become that person. So I'm glad I've taken the break, and I'm glad we're back today talking about this stuff, because it's invigorated me, because when I met Kersten, he wasn't doing a podcast. Now he's done more episodes than we've done. You, Steve, you've been on the radio. I mean, I'm a big radio fan, and I'm a huge DJ fan, and grew up. In fact, a guy, sorry, this is going off topic a little bit. A guy turned up at my house last week, and I thought he was a politician asking who I'm going to vote for in the upcoming election. Wasn't. It was a guy from Rajar, Rajar, asking about radio listening habits. Do I listen to the radio? And could I answer a couple of questions? And we stood chatting for probably about 15 minutes. And I've now got this diary that I fill in for them.
You're a diary holder?
Yeah.
I love that.
So I'm going to fill this in, because there are a couple of radio stations I listen to. And I told him how I consume it. I use an app. I use my car radio. I'll tell you which shows I listen to. I was more than happy to listen to that, because I can remember being 14, 15, sat in my bedroom, gone to bed, lights off, and I had my little transistor radio. And I used to listen to a guy called Tommy Boyd on, it was a London radio station, and be under the covers like with a little earpiece. And I used to love listening to the radio. And that gave me that's why I love podcasts, and why I like listening to different content, and the effort that we put in to do a good job. I think there's a lot of people who appreciate the hard work we do, even if there's times we feel like we're doing all this hard work. Is anyone even bothering? I appreciate the fact that people listen.
And I tell you one thing. Like when both of you guys took a little break, right? I was literally panicking. No. I was like literally. This is totally true. Like I was panicking, because I remember listening, because I listened to both of your shows, right? And I remember when, like, I was sort of waiting for the next He Shoots, He Draws episode. There isn't one. I'm thinking, oh no, what am I going to listen to? I very often listen to podcasts when I take the dog for a walk. That's my sort of standard. So either that or in the car, for example, and then I remember, like, Steve, when you took a break, and I'm there going, what's happening? Where's the Behind the Shot episode? Like, have I missed something? Like, is he sick?
You want to know? You want to know what's funny? Nobody mentioned anything to me. I think it was like 2 months after I stopped recording that my buddy who lives by me and does PR for some big camera companies, gets me a lot of my guests actually, said to me, hey, I saw that you took a break. Other than that, nobody mentioned it, which kind of made the break longer because it's like nobody misses me. Dave said something fascinating to me. Like you said you would tell people or ask people, is there any topic that you don't want to get into? Because again, you don't know what people are going on in their life. I understand that. Again, maybe it's the radio in me. I don't mind an uncomfortable moment. I can cut it out. It's recorded. It's not live if need be. I had one where somebody made a pic of a photographer, and after we were done, they emailed me and said, I'm thinking back on that. I don't think I sounded very good there. Could we cut that out? And I said, well, let me listen to it. And if I think that you don't sound good, I don't want to put anything out where you don't sound good. But sometimes if you prep things not to breach, that accidentally has tangents that cause you to avoid something that might be okay, that might be heartfelt, that might be that, good question moment, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't ever want to, I kind of don't ever want to avoid those things. The bigger thing for me than making somebody uncomfortable is controlling the flow of the show. Because one of the things I think most listeners / viewers don't realize is we're not just interviewers or hosts or whatever you want to call it for a podcast or a YouTube thing. We're also moderators. I've had guests, and we've seen this on television talk shows, right? You watch Graham Norton or you watch Jimmy Fallon or whatever. There are those guests that you ask this radically complex, in-depth question. Yeah. Right? We've had that where they're one or the opposite, where you ask somebody a question, which would probably be me. I'm a talker. I admit it. But you ask somebody a question and you want to keep the show to an hour. I mean, this show is going to be 2 hours by the time we're done. This is too fun, but still. My normal shows are usually 45 minutes to about an hour, 15 or something. And you ask somebody a question and you've got to get through, you have a body of questions you want to get to. Like you can't not ask some of these questions of this guest. And what should have been, really honestly, a sentence, maybe 2 sentences. 5 minutes later, they're going on. And you have to find a way, which luckily from radio, I have tricks that I use to pull the attention back to me, hopefully cleanly. Doesn't always work. My Canon episode, again, people complained about that. But people don't realize that we also have to periodically interrupt a guest to pull it back to us so that we can steer the show. Like you can't just let the guest just take over and talk. Do you guys find that?
Yes. Go on, Kersten.
Absolutely. Here's something interesting you actually mentioned. What I wonder is like, how important is, and this is really a question for both of you, like how important is sort of audience reaction to you when you put the show together? Like, when somebody comments on something like that, for example, how much do you take that to heart? And how important is that to you in the way that you then carry on making your shows?
Do you know, in all the time we've been doing the show, and we've tried to have interesting guests and interesting questions, and we do put effort into the questions. We do try to. I can't think of anyone specifically off the top of my head that had an awkward question, but I do remember one piece of feedback that came through once on one of the episodes. And all I said in the episode, all we were talking about in the episode was we were on about the royal family. And I had said, look, at the end of the day, the royal family do not affect my life. I grew up with history. We have great history in this country. A lot of our history is based around the royalty, kings and queens, and from William the Conqueror. I've stood in the battlefield in battle where he had arrow through his eye, all of that. I think it's incredible. And all I said was, I don't begrudge the royal family what they have and what they do, because it does not affect me. and we pay, as citizens of this country, we pay £1.60 each per year. So $2 a year we pay for the upkeep of the royal family, and they in turn generate revenue for the country. They get a little bit back to maintain it. And I said, and I have no problem with that. They entertain us, they do good things, they bring in tourism. This guy contacted me.
Oh boy!
And all he focused on was Prince Andrew, and absolutely went for me. Like, called me some like disgusting names. Really went for me. Like, I agree with the rumours. I'm not going to get into litigation stuff over this, but there's right. A lot of things being said about some things that had happened, and he went for me. He called me scum, and being a father, I'm very much kill them with kindness. Don't get in a fight. And I went back and I said, thank you for your feedback. I think you've kind of misinterpreted what we were talking about. And I feel that your reaction to this is crossed the line. So what you're referring to, what you're calling me, what you're saying, I'm a father. I have children. That is not me. I think that the character assassination you're making on me is uncalled for, and quite honestly, I don't appreciate it. And whatever's going on in your life right now this has triggered you, sort it out. So, because the way you're taking it out on me is really, really uncalled for, and I don't appreciate it. And I got a reply. I could have left it, but I just wanted to address it, and I got a reply, and it was less aggressive, but still aggressive. And I explained to him, I said, look, I totally understand where you're coming from. I don't agree with everything they do, any more than somebody who loves NFL and loves their team, but their quarterback is in police custody because they've beaten the crap out of their partner. That's equally that. People do bad things, but you can't tar everyone. And what made me laugh was I always go and go on people's social media if I've got their name and have a look at what they did. And the fact that he was intimating about children being involved in this. He had a daughter who was pregnant, and he'd done a photo shoot of his daughter, who was obviously early 20s. But his other daughter was about 11 or 12. And he'd done a photo shoot of her with her sister with a fake pregnancy. So he'd shot his daughter, his 11, 12-year-old daughter, pregnant. And I just thought, that's how strange that he's come at me with this thing. And to me, that was very wrong, photographing your own daughter pregnant at 12. There's always stuff going on in people's lives. And I was taught, you don't know what's going in their life for them to react to you. And they want to get it out. But it's the one that stuck with me was over something so small. No one's ever said, I can't ever remember anyone saying, we've had people go, I don't agree with what Glyn said. I didn't like what he said about that. I don't agree with it. And in one episode, I don't agree with what Dave said, but it's never been horrific feedback. It's just been, you're welcome to voice an opinion. You're not going to love every episode. And actually, we took that feedback and we made another episode about it, and we actually course corrected. We were like, yeah, actually, do you know what? Now you've made us think about that. Maybe the way we approached it was wrong. Maybe us not liking something is down to us not being educated about it and just throwing an opinion out there like our opinion is the one and only. So it's nice because a podcast you don't get. How many times have you two listened to a podcast in a car and you want to join the conversation?
They're
talking about something. Yeah, and you're like, yeah, and you can't. And it's really weird.
I've had to pause a show. Yeah. Because I had to get it out of my head out loud. Right? Oh, no, you're wrong. This. And when people commented, that Canon episode always comes to mind because that's where I've been attacked the most. And usually I kind of have a pat answer. Like sometimes they attack me so badly, like personal insults, and it does hurt. I mean, the truth is I would love to get 100% thumbs up on my YouTube videos or good reviews.
Yeah.
I have difficulty getting reviews on Apple Podcasts or something. I have very few, less than 50 probably. But on YouTube, when the comments are really mean, sometimes I want to engage and I know better, but they do hurt. Even after all these years, I do take them very personally because I really wanted you to like it. But I have this kind of pat thing that I always go with, which is, thank you for watching. I'm sorry this episode didn't work for you, but I appreciate your trying. And then a lot of times I'll go into a description of why that problem happened, whether it was lag over Zoom or whether it was, in that particular case, we were scheduled for an hour and the show went an hour and 45, and I had to keep it going to try and wrap it up because he had a meeting to get through at corporate. You know, whatever it is, I try and explain it. There's been a couple of times where somebody's so rude and I'm in a mood and just for whatever reason, it's like, I'm going to be snarky now. And it's interesting. Sometimes they'll come back and reinforce what they said. Sometimes they won't reply at all. But on occasion, you'll get them reply and say, I'm really sorry that I said it the way that I did. That was wrong. I appreciate your explanation.
Yeah.
And okay, success.
Do you get much, Kersten? If you...
I mean,
he's in the
don't
top
get
5%. He's the perfect podcast.
Well, no, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't get a lot of negative comments generally. I mean, what I tend to do is that when I do get a negative comment, you know, I stop for a minute and I think about like whether there's actually a point to that. You know, so rather than sort of discarding it offhand, I stop and think like, do they have a point? Is there something? Can I learn something from that? You know, did I do or say what they perceive me as having said? You know, and sometimes, you know, I watch something back and I think, oh yeah, I can see how that may have come across like that. But then I can address that comment in that way. But, you know, sometimes it's just a matter of like, well, no, I actually meant what I said. And here are the reasons why, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I can stick to my guns just the same. But I think it's important to just take, for me anyway, it's important to take a step back and actually just get sort of a wide angle view and so just try and understand where that comment is coming from. And I remember, you know, when we, in the very beginning, you know, when we started doing YouTube and whatever, and, you know, yeah, occasionally you get like a thumbs down, right? On one of the episodes. And I can see how that initially is like...
Kills me.
Yeah. But then, you know, and I remember Nick used to get really frustrated with that, you know? And then you look at it and you go like, oh, let's say, for instance, in the beginning, like, let's say you have 10 thumbs up and 1 thumb down or something. And he would get really frustrated about it. I remember I used to think like, well, but 90% of the people that watched that thought it was good. Or 90% of the people that actually took out, you know, made the effort to actually do the, you know, click the like button, you know, thought it was good. And just because one person didn't like it, that's not going to ruin my day.
The problem is mentally, it skews your, like my channel percentage is like 97%, but I'll have a video that'll go down to 94 because I've got one, and I still think there's one guy that hates me because I'll get thumbs downs on videos 5 minutes after I release an hour video.
Yeah.
But the truth is the thumbs down isn't you. I mean, I know that the thumbs down is telling the algorithm, don't show me more of this on YouTube. It's not a thumbs down on your content. But for some people in their head, it is. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, and some people like, I mean, but, you know, you've got to like, I think in everyday life, I think it's a healthy way of thinking is to realize that, you know, that you're just not everybody's cup of tea, as we say in the UK.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, I know, so, you know, some people I get on with, some people I don't get on with. Like some people I like, other people I don't like, and vice versa. The same is true. Some people like me, other people don't like me, and it's fair enough because they can think whatever they want to think.
Right.
So to me, the online world isn't any different. So I've sort of learned to not really pay that much attention to those negative comments or the thumbs down or anything like that. It's just because if I spend my time focusing on that, then that takes my sort of brain time away from thinking about the next episode. And that's what I want to be thinking about, So I'm not really necessarily that person that interested in negative comments. But I also have to say that I don't really get very many of those. So
I don't care about personal insults because it's like the old joke about the Ritz in London got a TripAdvisor score of 1 out of 10. And you read the review, it's like, stayed at the Ritz for the weekend, rained the whole time.
Yeah.
That was not the Ritz's fault. If they don't like me and they make a personal attack, I'm like, fine, because I can't do it. You have a choice to leave, whether it's how I look, my accent, what I'm talking about. You have a choice to leave. I'm not making you listen. I'm not making you watch. So if you don't like me, it's absolutely fine. You can be insulting because then you've kind of lost the argument. Why do I care what you think of me? If you say that subject was really boring, your guest was really boring, I think you could have asked better questions. When it's more of a kind of a critique-y, even though it can be snarky, it's more helpful to find out, I wonder why that one person versus, the 999 people that liked it. What was it about that one thing? And it's like, I take it on board. I try not to let it hurt, but it's kind of like someone leaving a comment. I don't even like photography.
Why do you listen?
Yeah. And someone said to me once about feedback. In fact, I think it was Scott Kelby said, ignore the best review you've ever had and ignore the worst review you've ever had, because the best review is probably your mum, and you could fart into the microphone and she'd still be proud of you and say it's the best thing you've ever done. And the worst review could be that guy's wife left him for an Englishman that morning. There's just something in their life could have happened that you can't do anything about. So ignore the worst, ignore the best, and take everything in between. And some of it is good critique. I've had critique about what I've spoken about, critique about guests, different things that you kind of take on board. And like you said, Steve, if you're in a snarky mood, you're like, okie dokie.
Oh yeah,
let's have some fun here. But I'll always kill with kindness. It's very, very rare that I'll get into a fight, but I will kill with kindness. I will, like you say, thank you for listening. Glyn, there was something Glyn did on his blog that was brilliant. It was, this guy left a really bad comment, like really horrible. But on WordPress, you used to be able to edit the comments that people had left. So what Glyn did was he edited the guy's comment to be really positive. Like, oh, Glyn, absolutely loved this week's blog post. You absolutely nailed it. The content was perfect. I love what I got out of it. And then Glyn would put a comment saying, thank you so much for your comment and for reading the blog. I really appreciate readers like you. So the guys come back. I never said that. You're a piece of... And so Glyn edited it again, saying, thanks, Glyn. Thanks for the feedback. The guy then realised he wasn't going to win this one, and he didn't come back. I mean, we don't really get. If I get feedback, I'm trying to think where we'd even get it now. Maybe social media. I killed the website because it was a lot of work and I was paying for it. I don't need it. I use the Simplecast because I found I was doing a job twice.
Right.
And then the comments in WordPress is normally bots and spam and stuff like that. So really now it's kind of, I don't know where the feedback would come from because I don't think there's anywhere to leave comments. Whereas you guys have got YouTube and we know what a breeding ground that can become sometimes. Where
my favorite one on YouTube is when
Yeah.
they come into a technical show and they ask a very detailed question that was answered in the show. But they saw the title or whatever it is. It's like my family that wants me to be their Google search for them because I know tech and they want to ask me, friends and family. And so I always have a rule, and that is I'm willing to help people that are willing to help themselves. If I get the sense that you've tried to research it, happy to help you. If I get the sense that you're using me as a faster way to type your Google search, I'm not going to help you. And so a lot of times I always try and answer the questions, but there's some frustration sometimes when it's, which case should I use on a Canon camera for photographing, horses jumping, cows jumping over the moon? Well, we specifically addressed cows jumping over the moon at the 38-second mark. I have a question for you guys, actually.
Yeah.
If somebody's made it this far into this show and has always had that idea, like all three of us had an idea for our podcast long before we did the podcast, right? If there's somebody out there, and I still think podcasting is a blast. I think podcasting is something everybody should do. If you've got an idea for a podcast, say again?
Everyone can do.
Everyone can do. It's democratized communication for both good and bad. But if there's somebody out there right now that's thinking, I can do better than these three idiots, and I just don't know, I wish I had some insight. If you were going to give somebody starting a podcast, whether it be on interviewing, on the back end, on whatever, what would your one tip be for people? And I'll go last.
Do you want to go first, Kersten?
What could you do better?
Well, just a tip for somebody on doing podcasting.
I want to start a podcast tomorrow, Kersten. What piece of advice would you give me to make it a good show?
And run away is not an appropriate answer.
Just do it and manage your expectations. That's the biggest thing, because the reason why the average lifespan of a podcast is like 7 episodes is because people think it's a great idea. They get into it super enthusiastically. Then they get started and realize it's a lot of work, and then they survive on average 7 episodes. And so, and it's really just, it's because people get frustrated. Like, you make an episode, you think it's the best thing since sliced bread, you put it out, and then, you figure, there's only my mom is listening to it. And you get really frustrated with the viewing numbers.
And your mom gives you a thumbs down.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so, and it's my dogs listening, not even I can honestly say, look, in 203 episodes, right? My wife has not once listened to an entire episode of the Camera Shake podcast, right?
She's not listened to yours either.
Yeah. There you go. That'd be weird, right? She listens to your show every week. She's never listened to mine. Dang it. But it's like, if you need to investigate your motives as to why it is that you want to make a podcast in the first place. And I think if your heart's in the right place, and if your motives are, genuine, and if you can learn to love the process, then podcasting becomes the most beautiful, creative, and communicative pastime and educational pastime that there is, because it's just an incredible opportunity to learn, to communicate, to exchange views and have conversations with other people. If you focus on the effort bit, or if you focus on the reward part, like how many downloads do I get? How many listens do I get? How many views do I get? Whatever. If that's your focus, if the numbers are your focus, you are destined to die very, very, very quickly. Which is why I openly admit I'm not really that interested in the numbers. I found out the other day, by sheer coincidence, when I saw a statistic of the Nielsen index, that apparently the Camera Shake podcast is in the top 5% of all podcasts worldwide. Well, what? Well, how did that happen? I absolutely zero idea that was going on, and it completely floors me because I have no expectations. And the reason why I can do this and I can put an episode out every week is because I really have no expectations. I'm as frazzled as anybody around me how far this podcast has gotten since the beginning of the pandemic, and what has come of it. I'm just as surprised as anybody else, and I'm just as naively sort of going into the future. But that protects me from getting frustrated about not having enough downloads or not having enough, views or whatever, because I genuinely, that's not why I'm doing it. I really, I can honestly say that if it was still the case that my mom and my dog and my neighbor were the only people listening to this podcast, if I think about all the takeaways that I've had over the last 4 years doing this, all the things that I've learned, I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. I mean, that's the thing. So find the right motivation for it. Don't worry about the numbers. You can think of it like a snowball rolling down a slope, and it will, over time, it will just pick up and pick up and pick up more snow. But it is a marathon and not a sprint. Anybody who wants to get to like the heights of Joe Rogan style, podcast success in the first 10 episodes, or anybody who thinks that they will go viral, if that's your motivation, you are dead in the water right from the get-go. Don't even start. Go do something else. If your ambition is to go viral in the world of social media or podcasting, like, this isn't for you, because the chances are so minuscule, right?
Yeah.
Do it for the right reasons. Do it because you love it. Do it because you can get the things out of it that only that are important to you, and then just go and do it. Don't worry about it. Like, remember, done is better than perfect. Don't worry about making, if you want to make the first episode perfect, if you really, if that's the thing that's holding you back, you will never get that first episode out. That's the thing. Like, because I hear that all the time. I'm like, oh yeah, I got to do this, and then I'm just waiting for that microphone. I want to update it, so now I've got to learn about this, and I don't, I haven't recorded the first episode yet because I haven't figured that one out yet. And it's like, I've been a guest on podcasts where the podcast host just put an iPhone in front of me and pressed record, and that was it.
Yeah,
I mean, it can't get any simpler or more simplistic than that. But it worked. It was absolutely fine. So if it's really something you want to do, examine your motives and, focus on the things that will bring you joy. And those are the things that are going to turn into the things that will drive you into showing up, every week or every fortnight, or whatever you promise your audience that you're going to do. Because this is the other thing, just like in real life, it's all about keeping promises. If I promise my audience that I will show up on a Thursday at 2 p.m. GMT, which is when I release an episode, I feel obliged to keep that promise, and that's what drives me. Like this, the little kick up the ass that sometimes I need, to make sure I sit down and I edit that episode, or I finish that, or I design the thumbnail, or whatever it may be. But I like that little bit of pressure. So these are the things that drive me. If you want to start a podcast, trust me, it's the most rewarding, most beautiful thing that you could possibly do. But make sure you understand what your motives are. I think that's mine. I was going to say in just a few simple words, that's my piece of advice. It was probably more than just a few simple words, but you get the gist.
What about you, Dave?
I can do mine in one word, because motivation's a good one. Consistency. From day one, consistency. Get the audio right. I mean, like I said before, just a microphone. Just learn how to record a voice, so that you've at least got that part, and then just be consistent. Just show up, make the episode, whether it's planning, recording, whatever, the consistency will build the audience. And that's what we found really early on. It was just doing the podcast. Now, the piece of advice I've given to people, because I was chatting to a guy at work, a friend of mine, Stuart, and he was talking about podcasting. He always used to listen to the podcast. He'd come in on a Monday and go, "Oh, great! I listened to the podcast. It was really good." I'd quite like to do that. And he's got a teenage daughter, and I said, "Well, why don't you just record a podcast with your daughter, but don't publish it? Just record a podcast, not for anyone else but yourself, and get into the rhythm of it. Learn the consistency." Sit down with her every Thursday at a certain time, pick a subject, talk about it for 20 minutes, record it like you were making an episode. Then if you feel it's something you're comfortable with that you'd like to do, my suggestion would be break the back of the failure of the 7. Record your first 10 episodes, release it over 10 weeks, because you've taken all the pressure off. Don't worry about the numbers, just record it and do it, get it out there, and record them all first. So like you guys, you bank episodes. Like I said to you off air, Steve, I've got 2 episodes that were banked. One will go out, one won't. But if you can do it without the pressure of it being released and then having that feedback, and just kind of get used to your voice, get used to the tone, the way you address yourself. Steve, you've got an amazing podcast voice, so I could listen to you talk about concrete because you've got the radio experience. But it's getting comfortable, and
we mix in the cement first, then we pour in the gravel.
But yeah, just like get on and do it, but be consistent. Try and keep it so that people know your show, they know your voice, your cadence, what you're trying to convey, and you'll get to a natural point. You will have a natural point where you don't want to do it anymore, you don't enjoy it, or you absolutely love it, and it'll be the best thing you've ever done. Pick a subject, talk about things you love. Don't try and force yourself into an area that you think you will do well because it's a popular subject, but you don't know anything about it. The thing I've struggled with, which I admire Steve, because initially you and I, Kersten, we had a partner, we had a sidekick, a co-host. But Steve, you've been on the radio, you've been a solo person. You sit by yourself, you do the episode, then you bring in the guest. I think in the whole history of He Shoots, He Draws, I think I've done 2 episodes where it's just been me.
I was one of them.
Really weird. Yeah. It was really me. No, I mean, even without a guest.
Oh,
okay. Yeah, just me, just purely nobody else, just a list of subjects and me just talking for however long. Because I do the intros, that's different. But I did 2 episodes where it was just me talking with nobody else. It was very weird.
That's an interesting thing, actually, because if I just interject there real quick, that's an interesting thing, because it is very different when you're just talking to camera compared to when you have somebody to talk to, whether that's, an interviewee that you're interviewing, or whether it's actually somebody in the studio that you're talking to, like your co-host or something. It's very different. And so it's one of the things that I've sort of done over time. This is just something that has sort of developed over the course of a couple of years or something, was that, I used to put myself under a lot of pressure, like getting that episode out every Thursday and having something there. And then, of course, things happen, like a guest cancels or something happens or whatever, and then you don't have an episode. Then you start to really freak yourself out because, it drives you nuts because you have to put something out. You don't want to let the audience down. And then what do you do? And so over time, I've come up with a very simple concept, actually. I just have 2 parallel formats of the show. Like, one is where I'm interviewing people, and that's 90% of the time, 95% of the time, that's what happens. But there are also those episodes where I call them solo flights, where I just talk about a particular subject. And sometimes that may be because something's happened in the world of photography, like a new camera has just come out, and this is like the all singing, all dancing thing that everybody's talking about, so I'm going to make an episode about that. or something very specific happens, and I want to address that particular subject, and I'll talk about that, right? But more often than not, when you see a Camera Shake podcast episode where it's only me talking, and where I discuss a particular subject without a guest, that's usually because in that particular week I've had a cancellation, for example, and I just didn't have a guest, or I didn't have a banked episode. And so that's one thing. The other thing I've learned is that in order to take that stress off of my shoulders of constantly having to produce content and not being able to take some time out and actually just sort of readjust my head or something, I've really now gotten into banking episodes, and I very often have like 5 weeks or something of episodes banked. And what that allows me to do is when everything just gets too much or I just really need some time off, I actually have the flexibility of just taking a few days, a few weeks off. For example, just recently I had to go to Germany to be part of a memorial celebration for a relative of mine. So yeah, I couldn't put an episode together that week, but I already had some banked, so I could set it all up beforehand. It was all ready to go, and it then launches itself automatically. I didn't have to worry. I could just take a week out and just be at peace with it, and I know the show goes on. So it's like coming up with these sort of strategies and mechanisms and whatever. Contingency plans, and that's just helped me to just relax a little bit about all of that kind of stuff, and not stress myself out too much.
And for me, the one tip I would give, we're almost at 2 hours, so I'll wrap it up with this. But the one tip I would give is always remember it's your show, right? And record that show with the intent that it's your show. I sometimes have people want to be on the show and they're just not a fit for what I want to do. And I say no. And I have sometimes they're referred by a really good friend, and I hate saying no because I know that friend is going to wonder, why didn't you take it? But it's my show and it's got to fit my format and my intent. And it's the same when I have a guest on. Sometimes I have a guest on that goes on a long diatribe, which is okay in certain contexts. But I record my show with intent. I know where I want to start. I know I want to get to your exposure. I know I want to get to your posing, your lighting, your post process. I know that I want to get through certain topics in a certain time frame. And so I start the show with the intent of, I expect it to be an hour, 45 minutes, hour and 50, somewhere around there. And if I feel at any point in time, and I've misjudged it, but if I feel at any point in time, I'm losing the intent I have for my show, I adjust accordingly. Either I adjust what I'm going to talk about, but there's some things I don't want to throw away, right? So like one of my favorite tricks, this is an old radio interview trick. A great way to take a conversation from somebody. They're talking, and all you have to do is find a breath. And you interject politely, you know what? Let me just say, I think you're really right about that. And you finish their thought, right? In whatever, It doesn't have to be the thought they had. You just finish the thought, right? So they're in the middle of talking and you go, as they breathe, you know what? I totally agree with what you said. And I think that's going to be X, Y, Z. So when we move to then the lighting, what did you do here? Right? So it's interject, finish their thought, and then just immediately switch gears and go somewhere else. If you're starting a new podcast and you've never interviewed somebody, you better learn how to manage the interview. And again, watch talk shows, watch Graham Norton, watch Jimmy Fallon, watch, whoever, watch the old Johnny Carson shows, and really learn how to manage the interaction with a guest that is either talking too short and you got to make crap up on the fly because, you were in the middle of a cough thinking they were going to go on for a second and they said one word, or vice versa. And that is they're going into the weeds and you really want to keep it tighter than that. And you've got to be able to pull it back and you'll get crap for it, right? People will say you interrupted your guest, but that's okay because it's your show, right? Always remember it's your show and record it with the intent that it's your show. We're at 2 hours. Is there anything else we should do?
I tell you what, there's one more thing I'm going to add to what you just said. And I remember at the very beginning when I started the Camera Shake podcast, and I was starting to get sort of better known guests on the show. And of course, you always at the beginning, you always have this sort of nagging thing in the back of your head where you think like, well, what's the point? There are already so many photography podcasts out there. Like, why would anybody care about just another one, right? Like, what's the point? Like, I'm not doing anything like outrageously new. There are already podcasts out there where people interview other people, and it's just, what's the point, right? And I remember having Tommy Reynolds on the show and having a chat with him about exactly that and about how he started his YouTube channel. And he said to me, like, look, a friend of mine once gave me one piece of wisdom when I was quarreling with the same question, like, why should I start a YouTube channel when there's already lots of YouTube channels out there? And my friend said to me, there may be lots of other channels out there where people teach the same thing, but nobody teaches it quite like you. And just like at high school, if you think back to your teachers at high school, like, some people loved a particular teacher and other people hated that teacher. And you may have had your favorite teacher at high school, but your best friend may have hated that teacher. People respond to people in very specific ways. Yep. And there's an audience for everyone.
Yeah.
And basically what I mean is that the way you interview somebody is unique to you, and there'll be an audience there who will like the way that you run your show. And that's what makes it unique for that particular audience. And that's as good as any a reason to get started. Yeah, because nobody's going to do it quite like you.
I totally agree. And so that everybody knows, because we didn't say this at the beginning, we're each, or maybe we did, we're each going to release this show on our own channels at the same day, probably not the exact same time, but on the same day. And so since we're each going to be on each other's channels, we should probably say where people can find us. So Kersten, where can people find you?
The Camera Shake podcast, you can find the Camera Shake podcast on all audio platforms where awesome podcasts live. So no matter whether you're listening to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, whatever it may be, you'll most likely find it there. If you're watching or if you want to watch the video version of the podcast, then just head over to youtube.com/Camera Shake, where you'll see this podcast in full Technicolor.
Dave, what about you?
Well, mine's going to be audio only, but I will put this up on my YouTube channel, but I can't remember what my YouTube username is. I think it's Dave Clayton or Dave Clayton. But I need to do some work on it. But generally, He Shoots, He Draws is on Instagram, Facebook, but Instagram and just any podcast app is where you'll find all the old episodes. And then we're restarting back in May anyway with new stuff. But yeah. And
if you have comments
on all of us
on the video, it's my fault. If you want to find me, the podcast is Behind the Shot. It's at behindtheshot.tv, and it's Behind the Shot TV on our socials. And then if you want to find my personal site, it's at Steve Brazill, like the country Brazil, but 2 L's. And then it's at Steve Brazill, stevebrazill.com for the website. And then it's at Steve Brazill for all of the social media, pretty much anywhere. I don't really use Facebook. That's Steve Brazill Photography. But anywhere else, Mastodon, Blue Sky, X/Twitter, all of that type stuff. It's at Steve Brazill or at Behind the Shot TV, behindtheshot.tv. So there we go.
Google is your friend. Just
Google
type it in.
Is your friend, yes.
And it will show you all the stuff.
Guys, again, I appreciate your inviting me to this so much.
Honestly, thank you for all the work you've done into making this the video extravaganza that we've been able to do, because I'm learning all the time, the whole eCam thing and OBS. It's video is something I'm moving more into. So, thanks to both of you for what you do. And this has been like so much fun. So thanks.
Yeah, it's been incredible. This actually goes back to this was actually originally Dave's idea, a long time ago. You mentioned it to me, like, I don't know, it must have been like over a year ago or something.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Well,
and you were the perfect third person, Steve.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate having been on both of your shows. And those of you watching my show, if you're watching this on Behind the Shot, make sure you go watch Camera Shake Podcast. Make sure that you go watch He Shoots, He Draws. Again, Alan Hess, not here, but usually on He Shoots, He Draws with Dave, and a good friend of mine, and he lives just south of me, a hero of mine, actually, in music photography. So yeah, again, guys, thank you very much. And for my listeners or viewers, thank you so much for watching.
Cheers, guys. See ya.
See you later.
The day we're going to release this is actually Kirsten's birthday?
Yeah.
It is, yeah. So 9th of May, yeah.
And you're 21?
Yeah, wish.
Plus VAT.
Actually, I'm going to be 50.
Dave,
so, yeah.
should we sing?
You don't want to hear me sing, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Have you ever heard foxes?
Yeah, foxes and deer.
Foxes in pain.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Peter Piper's pecker plunges plumes.
She sells seashells on the seashore. I'm not a pheasant plucker. I'm a pheasant plucker's son.
Hi, welcome to Behind the Shot. Hi, welcome to Behind the Shot. I'm Steve Brazill, and today's show is going to be a little different. Normally about now, I would do a little bit of a kind of an intro, and then I would tell you about what the show is going to be. What the hell am I doing?
This is going in the bloopers.
Top 5%, man. Top 5%.